lot of times we end up going over and having to push things into other classes. We're trying to get it to where we don't do that as much. So anyway, we're going to be talking about some woodenware and equipment. We're going to mainly focus on Langstroth because as new beekeepers, it's one of the easier setups to work with. There's all different types of equipment out there that's available, and I have no problems with people that want to do top bars or long langs. I know very little to nothing about moray hives, but some people like those. There's even a flow hive. And if you look at different situations from other countries, they have all different kinds of equipment. You know, B-rules. You know, they don't care.
You got the lamp on up there, and I'm going to go to the top bar out on the deck with the next break.
But even in the Langstroth, there's different sizes and different ways you can configure. So we'll talk a little bit about that, but mainly we'll focus on the Langstroth hive, and there's the 10 frame, and there's 8 frame in that. The easiest equipment to get anywhere is the 10 frame. 8 frame comes in like a second. If I would use 8 frame stuff, I have to order it. There's no bee supply houses around close where I can buy that directly. So I went with the 8 frame mainly because of weight. It's much easier to lift and manipulate by myself because of weight less. Our scholarship board here, Keldon's our scholarship for this year. Because we get 10 frames because that's standard. And there's also, if you read the Backyard Beekeeper book, that guy, he uses 8 frame all medium because of the weight. Especially as you get older, you know, it's harder to lift these boxes, especially, you know, if you have a lot of honey in there. It can get pretty big. The deep frame, like this, filled with honey, will weigh about 10 pounds. So you take, if you actually happen to get a whole 10 frame box filled completely with honey, that's over 100 pounds that you're lifting. Yeah, that's the weight of the box. You know, usually the bees won't put too much on the outside frame, but so 100 pounds. Now, even with use a medium frame, this can easily weigh 5-6 pounds. So, first I'm going to describe a little bit about some hives through history. I'm going to talk about different components, configurations, main features of standard beekeeping woodenware, including frames and foundations. So you're going to learn a lot of new terms, and you kind of need to know that because when you're talking with other beekeepers, you know, they need to know what you're talking about. So I'm going to talk a little bit about beekeeping, the equipment, additional equipment you need, and protective gear used in hive inspections and maintenance. And a little bit about beekeeper conduct in the apiary. So, a related group of honeybees is called a colony. You know, we use the term hive. Hive is actually the equipment that colony goes in. But I know everybody has a tendency to say, oh, I've got, 10 hives. Well, you can have 10 hives and not actually have 10 colonies, but, you know, a lot of times people will say hive. They also use the term super a lot of times, which can be confusing because a lot of times people will call it these narrow boxes supers, but they're really not supers, they're mediums and shallows, and super is a term that really should just be used to mean that you're using that box for honey collection. But I know that a lot of times people say, well, I've got, you know, 2 supers. Well, 2 supers, does that mean that you've got 2 brood boxes, or you have 2 brood boxes with 2 supers on top? It can be confusing. So a hive is a man-made container designed to house a colony. And you already saw this picture a little bit. This is a pictograph that was done back in 7000 BC. So even back then they were, and I think maybe this was supposed to be a cliff, but it could have been a tree. But they were climbing up there on ropes in order to get bees. With no protective equipment. They had to pay for it as far as probably getting stung. Also, of course, there's evidence of, you know, bee wax use, clear back then. Beeswax and honey were the original wound treatments. You know, they coat wounds with honey. They used honey for sore throats. They'd use it as a basis to put other herbs and stuff in. But because honey is sterile and antiseptic, they used it on wounds a lot. A lot of times if you had a deep wound, they would put hot beeswax over it to seal it. It's been, you know, honey, propolis, and wax has been used since basically mankind discovered these bees did this. And of course they probably discovered that pretty quick as soon as they saw some critters taking the honey out of a hive. Also, they probably ate a lot of bee larvae. It's high protein, and people that are insectivores love fried rodent. So if you really get hungry, you can eat that stuff. So it's been around a long, long time. The start of apiculture by people, you know, they basically would start out just maybe using a hollow log. Just, you know, the bees would be in a hole. They'd use a saw it off the top, saw it off the bottom, and take it. They would also do things like they'd, you know, make hollow logs like this and put holes in them. They'd stack hollow logs up. The main problem with this is that in order to harvest the honey, you have to completely destroy the hive. So the Egyptians, they did things like they'd make hollow mud tubes and have beehives in those. They had clay pottery with holes in them in order to have beehives. The Greeks, they had a pretty unique way of doing it. It kind of, in a way, it's kind of like a top bar. They would put boards on the top, let the bees build their combs naturally on the boards. They had an opening in the bottom of the crop for the bees to come in and out. So they could actually use this to kind of manipulate and get into the hive without possibly completely destroying it. So the priestess, they had, you know, they worshiped bees, they had priestesses of bees. You can find Egyptian jewelry that has depictions of bees. Of course, they also like the scarab beetle, which is actually a dung beetle. They kind of worship them too. And I can see why. Dung beetles take away and remove the manure from livestock. They bury it in the ground. European medieval monks, they started using the coil steps. And you still see that as a symbol for bees and honey everywhere. But it hasn't been used for a very, very, very long time. But it's still a symbol that represents bees and honey. Steps were used for so long that they have become a symbol. But you cannot use them. They are illegal in all 50 states. We'll talk about why in a minute. They've come up with all different, everybody's trying to invent better bee equipment. They had this one that was, the frames open like pages of a book. Over in Europe, they have bee houses in some countries where you walk in the back door and you can pull out the drawers. The beehives are actually in drawers. And they have, the fronts are all open and all stacked up. So, lots of designs, no real standards at all. There's people in the beekeeping community that go out and look for these antique hive stuff and study them, figure out how they work. There's interesting articles to read sometimes. All different kinds of stuff. No real standards at all. And there's still some of that going on. I was reading about a guy that built a bee cabinet. It was like a big, really nice wooden cabinet. And you opened a door in the back and you were supposed to slide the bees out in drawers. I thought, there's some things that might not work too good because I don't think he considered purpose. What was going to happen when they gummed up everything. So, modern woodenware, we got Top Bar, Warray, there's a Rose, there's National. Some of these, the frames are pretty much standardized in most equipment, but I even noticed that between Man Lake and Daydon, there's a slight difference in size of the boxes. The Daydon boxes are about 3/8 of an inch smaller than Man Lake. They will work together, but if you're, OCD about it, it'll drive you nuts. There are 3 widths to the Langstroth. There's 8 frame, there's 10 frame, and there's 5 frame. So this one here's a 10 frame. These are 8 frame boxes, and this is a 5 frame nucleus box. And for like egg extension, any of these is still considered a hive for your egg extension. So you could have all 5 frames.
So when you see them stacked up outside of the pasture, does that mean that's just your colony is expanding and that's all one colony? Or
yes, all one colony normally.
Because your colonies need to be separated with so much room from the
But you can, I've seen videos of Canadian beekeepers that are trying to raise nukes in that cold environment. And a lot of times they use some specialized equipment that has more than one nucleus colony, but they push them together in order for them to be able to share warmth in that cold environment. So you can buy equipment that looks like one box, but it's like 2 boxes, and you can get divided. And there's all different kinds of stuff you can buy. This is last year's catalog. But here's the Man Lake catalog. See how thick that is? Different types of equipment. And they don't sell it all. This one here's a couple of, this is the 2017, this is Daydon. That's their catalog. This is Texas Bee Supplies catalog. This is Bushy Mountain. I mean, yeah, you can get catalog. They haven't sent me new catalogs yet this year, but you can go to the Man Lake website, and I think the Day Center, and just ask for a catalog. But they have all their stuff online too. But just get a catalog and go through there and take a look at all the stuff. And you know, they don't carry a full line of everything that's out there available. It's mind-boggling of how much different types of bee equipment, and they all have different types of uses. So what we're mainly going to talk about is, you know, 10 frame, 8 frame, and a little bit about the ridiculous, because we can't go, and it's just confusion to talk about all the details of all the different equipment, and there's slightly different management styles for the different equipment. So we're trying to keep it a little simpler for you. The 10 frame is what's used in the commercial beekeeping. So the migratory beekeepers, they're all using 10 frame. So that's the standard for the commercial industry. Top bars are not designed to be packed up on pallets and moved across the country. The contracts for pollination contracts, you know, they're talking about 10 frame equipment, and they talk about the strength of the bees. You have to meet certain qualifications in order to be able to take your bees to migratory. You know, they have people that make a living writing contracts and taking care of bees out in California while they're out there. It's big money. I was told at one time for like having 2 deep 10 frame hive that has like 60 to 80,000 bees in there for a pollination contract. I think they pay them at least $200 a week to have them on their farm.
200 a year.
200.
For a trip. Yeah, for a trip. But they're only out there about a month.
Well, but I mean, at each place they go, they move them around a lot.
Well, that's true. You're right. If you go to more than one grower, each grower will pay you.
Right. So they, you know, it might be on almonds, and then they may move it to some sort of fruit tree crop. And then when they're done, usually they go to California first. When they're done in California, they'll go up like to North Dakota and go to the canola. Some of them will keep their bees up there and actually put them in big storage warehouses now. Others will bring them down to Texas and take them down in the valley and, you know, pollinate crops down there, like strawberries and things like that, watermelons, and small beekeepers that are wanting to go commercial. A lot of times they'll start out just by sending maybe a truck with about 100 hives down into the valley to pollinate watermelon. There's different ways to do it. But they all go with the standard 10 frame. Dr. Langstroth, Reverend Langstroth, he's considered the father of American beekeeping for 2 reasons. He's the one that discovered bee space. How much space was ideal for beekeeping? If you look at a frame, you'll notice that there's this little bit of wood on either side here, and a certain amount of space between those frames. When they match up, it puts the comb at a certain distance, and it's the ideal spacing for bees. The way the frames sit down in the boxes, the space between the top of the frame and the inner cover or lid is a certain amount of space, which is ideal for the bees to move around. If you give them too much space, they want to fill that, so we'll start building burr cone and stuff. If you have too much space between the tops of the frames and the lid, they'll start building stuff on top of that. They want a certain amount of space. If you've got more than that, then, they want to fill it. If it's less than what they need, then they won't use it at all. They won't build there. Yeah. Small cracks, they propose it. So he discovered that any space less than a 1/4 inch is bees will fill it. So bee space, he discovered that. He also came up with movable frames. So being able to pull the frames out to inspect or to harvest was highly desirable. So he had a patent for his hives.
So are these all considered Langstroth?
Yeah, these are all Langstroth. Even though there's some additional people that made improvements on that. He was the initial one, so they're called Langstroth.
With the removable frames.
Removable frames. Before he did the movable frame, most beehives, their frames were fixed. So you had problems and limitations without being able to detect diseases in there or any problems because you couldn't pull them out and inspect them. A lot of times you had to basically destroy the hive in order to do any harvest. But disease became one of the major issues. So, movable frames encourage rapid inspection without endangering or angering the bees. Weak colonies can be strengthened with brood or eggs and larvae being moved in, larvae for requeening. Strong colonies can increase in size because you can stack them and add to them. Stores and broods can be rearranged or reconfigured for different reasons and seasons. It allows honey extraction without destroying the comb. Honey and comb requires, honeycomb requires 7 or more pounds of honey to make a pound of beeswax. So beeswax is extremely valuable. So you want to, years ago when you bought honey, it was always going to be comb honey. It would always be in wax comb. Once they came up with the extraction process, people started buying liquid honey, and now, as beekeepers, we're kind of introducing comb honey again back into the market, and a lot of people will see comb honey and they go, what do I do with this? They aren't used to seeing it. Because when they learn how to extract it, they can save their comb and use it over and over again. Increased honey production, because the bees no longer have to be killed to remove the honey. Now, inspection by removable frames is required in the United States. That's why you can't use the steps anymore, because you have to be able to remove the frame for the apiary inspectors to inspect. We have some diseases that have come through that are very devastating. You have to destroy the hive completely. The American foul brood is so horrible about leaving spores in the hive that even if that equipment is left vacant for years and you put it in use again, the bees can get the American foul brood, and it's very infectious and can wipe out all the bees in the whole area because they'll be moved from. So that's one of the reasons why the same thing was true with, European foul brood when it came in. You can treat for that now, but it was devastating. It was wiped out. So that's why you have to have movable frame equipment now. So, standard components of a hive. You start at the bottom. You really kind of need some type of hive stand. You can get these little low hive stands, and on the internet you'll see a lot of hives that are just basically sitting on pallets, or they're sitting on really low stands. We have enough problems with pests in our area. I really recommend you have some sort of stand, about at least 10 to 14 inches high. You can use things like, a lot of people like to use concrete blocks. Those will work. I don't particularly care for them because it's too easy for ants to get in, but you can use those. But you want to raise them up. It keeps the skunks from bothering your hives. It kind of keeps the raccoons and rats and mice from coming in. It's just a good idea to build a stand.
Can you go too high?
Yeah, I made that mistake. My first ones I built, I made them 18 inches tall. And that would have been okay if I was just doing like single boxes, maybe with one medium on top. But you get 2 deep stacked up, plus a couple of supers, and pretty soon I was up here trying to take off
So
boxes.
it's basically for you, not for people.
Yeah, I didn't want to have to get a step ladder to work my hive. Yeah, 10 to 14 inches is pretty ideal for most beehives. It doesn't completely prevent it, but say skunks, they like to come up at night and they'll scratch the entrance, and then when the bees fly out, they'll put their tail over, and then the bees will get in their tail, and then they'll just munch bees right out of their tail. And, skunks are mainly insectivores, so the skunks will do that. But if they have to stand up on their hind legs to scratch that entrance, that leaves this nice long belly here for them the bees to sting. It also helps with the mice, because they'd have to climb up in order to go in, so they're less likely to do that. But it doesn't prevent everything. And I've seen hives that were set on the ground, like migratory type lids, that, raccoons just took them off. Help yourself. Raccoons like to eat insects and honey and wax and everything.
So they'd make a big mess out of stuff in just a little while.
Yeah. So, having a little stand for it is kind of, well, not only that, it helps the beekeeper's back. If you're having to reach down here to lift up heavy boxes, and then you put it over here on top of the lid or something, and you lift it back up, that can get hard on you. Pretty soon you're going. So, not only do I use stands, I have some real sturdy plastic TV tray type tables that I take out there, and I'll set it next to my hive, and I'll lift the boxes and I put them on those tables. So I'm not doing this down here and back with boxes that even when they only slightly.
All about saving the back.
Yeah. And in the older yard, the more you worry about that. So I highly recommend that you build some sort of stand. The next part is a bottom board. Now there's all different kinds and styles of bottom boards. You can get what they call solid bottom boards. You can get screen bottom boards. This is a entrance reducer. You use that at different times. It's usually got a wider slot and a narrower slot. There's the narrow slot there. There's a wider slot. When you first introduce bees into the hive and it's fairly weak, you want to use a smaller opening because it's easier for the bees to defend that. Also, you'll go down to smaller entrances in the wintertime, just to kind of cut the airflow that comes in, make it a little more. So, you know, you use entrance reducers at different times in the year. You can even get things like robin screens and all of that kinds of things. You can get little metal ones with holes bees can go through, but the mice can't go through. They call them mouse guards. There's a lot of stuff available out there. I have never had to have a mouse guard, but I have used some robin screens before on hives that I consider weak. So, as far as bottom ones go,
So I see the stand with holes in it. Can it be solid or does it need those little
it can be solid. The thing about having the air hole is because in Texas, a lot of us use what's called a screen bottom board.
Do you want to, in the wintertime, put something solid down there and keep it warmer?
See, this is a screen bottom board. Now, in the summertime when it gets hot, I take out the insert. It allows the bees to drop debris and stuff directly to the ground.
Their frass doesn't build up.
Well, they clean that out.
Okay.
You know, like for the queen, whenever she produces frass, they take it and they remove it from the hive. I've got demonstration hive where you put the bees in and lock them in there, and it's funny watching the bees, because you know every bee has a different job, and the bee that's in charge of removing frass, or if there's a little scrap of paper or any debris in there, they just run around like crazy looking for a place to get out to throw away the trash. It's like, I can't get out to get rid of this, so they'll be dragging it around all over the place. That they will, of course, the bees that are in there that have flight capability, they will fly out and do a cleaning. So, like on a nice day in the winter, you might not want to stand real close to the front of the hive where the bees are flying around, because you'll go in with glass all of it. So,
You do use a screen bottom board, start very here, and you need to do something to prevent rats. You look go right up through that screen, that's gonna be your frame.
yeah. What I do, well, a lot of people put like, you know, pave stones and things like that. I buy Durock. You go to Home Depot, you can find Durock. It's a piece of concrete backer board that you use to put behind tile. I'll buy that. It runs about $10, $11 a sheet. I'll take and score it and snap it in half. And one half of those, they're 5 foot by 3, I believe. So one half of those is perfect to go underneath a hive stand and prevent weeds and stuff from coming up through there.
Well, it reduces the cover for pests too, you know,
Yeah.
rodents and such love to have
And
have
then,
cover.
Then, you know, a couple of times a year, I'll put on my bee suit and take the weed whacker out there. They don't seem to mind the weed whacker unless you've got one of those weed whackers that, you know, is a push behind. Those, oh, they hate those. It puts off so much vibration, they will come after you. But, you know, like I can run.
Little electrical is probably great.
Yeah, electrical will be okay. I have an Echo that I weed whack with, and that doesn't seem to bother them a whole lot. I wear a suit just for, you know, cautionary reasons, but I've never had them come out and attack me when I was weed whacking with that. And having the Durock there, I can weed whack right up to the edges without any problem. You know, I can use my riding lawnmower and zip back and forth around there. They don't say a thing about that. So, you know, I can the chainsaw out there close to them. It didn't seem to bother me. They went after my husband instead. So, if you have a screen bottom board, you definitely want to have openings so that any debris, and one of the things when you treat for varroa mites, those will fall off and it allows them to go down through. So in the summertime, I pull my deals out and let them have that additional ventilation too. Because folks, it gets hot here. You know, it gets to where a beehive, you know, can go well over, you know, 93 degrees in the summer, even in the shade.
You can move them, like, when it gets cooler, and say they don't have as much sunshine, when the sun starts to set different places, or are they good in the same spot all year long?
I keep mine in the same spot all year long. I have mine mainly under trees, so that they get some dappled shade. And it's not so much for the bees, it's for the beekeeper. You know, I don't like working out in the full sun. They're mostly deciduous, so in the wintertime, you know, they drop their leaves and they get a little bit more sunlight. My nucleus boxes, I overwintered some one year, and I had them facing south in the full sun, and I could go out there on a day when it was like 50 degrees, and my big hives, they didn't have anybody out wandering around, but those little nucleus boxes, they were warmed up and they were out flying around.
We got another lecture about setting up very, very, location for the best of them. But if you get a little, you don't like to move out. Move out, so once you get them set, let's have to do, we'll try to set them.
So there's all different types of bottom boards you can buy, and you know, there's, you know, you talk to different beekeepers. There's beekeepers down here in Texas that say you don't have to close up your screen bottom boards in the wintertime.
So is it better to have them in shade for the sake of the bees, or does it matter during direct sunlight all the time?
If you
That's
have them in
detrimental.
full sun, you need to have a spot where they get a little bit of, well, not
Airflow.
so much shade, but a little bit of airflow. You definitely don't want to put them someplace where the air's stagnant. But we'll cover that. That's like our last
So
lecture.
as long as you got the screens on the bottom in the summertime, and they're out in full or something like that. Yeah, but it's on the hill or wherever you get the top green.
Yeah, well, like I said, well, you know, that's the last thing we'll be talking about location. This is a solid roller board. A lot of people use solid roller boards all the time. It's up to the individual beekeeper. I like to use screen ones in summer, then in the winter time I close it up. The grid, that's for varroa drop counts. So when you treat for varroa, you can take and put like Vaseline on here, and then when you treat, you know, the varroa mites will fall off the bees, and then they'll drop down in here, and you can pull this out and count the mites and see how effective it is. It's one of the ways. You know, you can also do other types of, we'll be talking about doing varroa mite checks and how you do that.
That's just a strategy to be able to tell how many per square inch.
Yeah.
You have to gauge your problem.
They'll gauge your problem and gauge how effective the treatment was. I don't actually use that for that. In fact, I don't even use this item. It was donated to me, so I use it for education. I use A-frame equipment. Okay, so you've got, that's your bottom board. Then you have what you're going to use for brood boxes. So deeps are normally what's used for brood boxes. This is the deep right here. I go with a philosophy of trying to get my hive strong enough to have 2 deeps. for brood and for the bees' honey storage. I use supers, or these either mediums or shallows, based on what I'm trying to do. I use those on top for honey production. So they're only on during honey flow time. So honey flow, I usually put them on in April. I'll take them off like the end of July, first part of August. So deeps, and there's some people that go with just a single deep for their bees. You have some management things you have to do if you do that. I usually recommend going with 2 deeps and let them fill this. They'll have brood in the center here. They'll put some stores usually on either side when they fill up most of my 8-frame boxes. And I have like at least 6 out of the 8 frames that are fairly full. Then I'll add a second deep, and a lot of times they'll have some more brood in here, and they'll put more honey stores up here. And then at the end of the season, I let them keep any honey that they have in these boxes so that I don't have to feed them all year long. So then on top, you know, most people will use mediums with medium frames with plastic foundation because it's easier to extract. This is a deep frame. This is a medium frame with plastic foundation. If you're using an extractor, you want to have a solid plastic foundation, because if you use a wax foundation, a lot of times that'll blow out in your extractor and make a mess. So this is a deep, this is a medium, this is the shallow, and this shallow has a wax foundation that's wired, so it's wired wax. And I use this in shallow boxes, and the reason I do that is because you can take a knife and you cut down between these wires and put that chunk of wax with honey in it into a jar and then fill it with liquid honey, and that is what they call chunk honey, and you can sell it at a higher price than you do regular liquid.
Usually double.
Huh?
You have a 1-pound jar of regular honey, whatever you charge for that, if you put a big chunk of comb in there, it's double. But then the bees have to replace that comb next year round for the spring.
But you can buy what's called, you know, you can buy wax, and you can buy it wired, or you can actually buy what they call thin surplus, which is nothing but beeswax, and that's what I use these frames for. And I do that if I want to do what they call cut comb honey. With the cut comb honey, you're taking and cutting a chunk of comb out, putting it in a box, and selling it that way. Liquid honey this last year was going for about $10 a pound. Chunk honey around about $18 a pound. I was selling my comb honey for $15 for 12 ounces, but another beekeeper in our club, Michael Barber, he was selling like the Ross round things at a Whole Foods type place in Denton, and he was getting like $20 a piece for it, and they were selling out. Now this frame, this is one that I use for this plain wax, and it's a little different. It's called a wedge. So you pop this little piece of wood off here and slip the wax in here, and then you got to go back and nail this on for that. I also use that for the wired wax. and then you have to put little pins through these holes on the ends to help hold it in place. So that's something you probably won't be doing your first year, but it's something you can do in the future.
You could get into woodworking then, couldn't you?
Yeah. Well, it helps if you have foundation. There are beekeepers out there that believe that them building their own wax is more natural. So a lot of times they'll buy, an empty frame, and they'll like put fishing line or wires, and you can buy rods and stuff to put in there and let them build their own wax. Or they'll take and just put a narrow strip of wax start as a starter and let them build off of that. But once again, if you're using extracting equipment, it'll blow out. Top bars, they don't put any type of foundation usually in those. It just has a little wedge at the top for them to start building on. But you can't extract top bar frames.
You also have to be careful with putting in frames with nothing in them. You gotta watch them and make sure they don't build cross lines. Okay? They don't know direction. Still right with
Start with every other one or something before.
Yeah.
And they will build that.
well,
Not very smart.
So you can do a lot of different things. If you go to these bee conventions, they have all different kinds of fancy equipment for embedding wires, and you can even buy equipment to take your beeswax and make your own sheets of wax. I mean, if you want it, it's probably available out there. But as brand new beekeepers, we suggest that you buy the frames with the plastic foundation, which is coated with a thin coat of wax, because it's just easier to start with. And then, 2 or 3 years from now, if you want to try to do cut comb honey, take on that task.
I'm kind of confused now. So you got the brood box, right? That's where they naturally build the cells,
Yes.
right? And so these are up on top.
Right.
Just
This would, the deeps, or what you're going to call it, the blue box. Like I said, you can't. There are people out there that will use the 8-frame mediums and use those as brood boxes, just because they don't like lifting the weight. You have to manage them slightly different, and we'll get into that when we talk about management. But for the most part, in this standard setup, you would use, you'll start off with one bee. Let your bees build out in that. When it gets about 80% full, or like in the 10-frame hive, when they start, filling out like the 7th or 8th frame, then you would put another box for expansion on top. And they'll start expanding up in there. They've got the strength and the resources to come in. Then when you get ready to try and produce honey, then you will use the smaller, either mediums or the shallows. The reason I use the shallows for the cut comb and wire wax, because it's easier to do that when I'm trying to do that. Also use shallows as feeder protectors in the wintertime.
So how quickly will that all happen? Start with the first box. Like, how much time passes by before you're ready to start doing it?
depends.
Yeah, it depends. It depends on your laying capability of the queen. It depends on the available resources. If you've got, in the spring, if it's really, really rainy, whenever it rains, it'll wash away any nectar and pollen on the flowers, and it takes about 3 days for them to start producing nectar and pollen again. So like last spring, we were getting heavy rains every 2 or 3 days. It looked wonderful out there. Nice and green, things are blooming. There was absolutely no resources for the bees because the rain kept taking it out. So there was, I almost had a hive starved. And then I had people that said, I lost a hive. I thought they had plenty. And I looked in there and they were dead, they were starved.
So is that when you start feeding them sugar water?
Yeah, you can feed them sugar syrup as a way to counteract that. So,
Normal every year, if I put it this year, I'm gonna feed it sugar water in it, because they got to build on it. But if I put it this year, it's gonna help you do, all things given in about 3 to 4 weeks, I've got to add second box. And then another 3 to 4 weeks after that, still feed some water, still building cones. And after about another 3 or 4 weeks, 2 months after I put that first week in, slowly, I'm ready to see. Give or take, depends on the weather.
yeah, there's a lot of variables. The weather, how the flowers are blooming that year. The sprinkled queen, is she a queen that immediately starts laying like 2,000 eggs a day? It's going to build up a lot faster. If she's a little slower and getting going, the hive may not build up as fast. Like I said earlier, hives have personalities, but they also have a lot of environmental, pressures that they're dealing with. And if they're like
I've had hives where I've gone 2 years, and they'll pull up those bees, and they'll put a lick on it, and it's just, I'm not gonna say.
yeah.
I'll get this one too.
So can I just add something real quick?
Sure.
So the same thing is if you get into summer, so they fill your first box up, and they're going too deep, you put another one on, they fill that up, and all of a sudden it's the middle of July.
Something hot and dry.
A lot of people will just go and add a box because that's what you're supposed to do. But at the same time, the food sources is going to dry up a little bit. Typically, you got to start drying up, and now you got an extra box up there.
That they have to
A lot
defend.
of people I worked with last year added a box, and in September we took it off. It was still
Still empty.
so.
Yeah. That's why you inspect and read what's going on in your hive and keep records, which we'll go through, how to do all that. And, you can have 2 hives that are 10 foot from each other, and one of them will be going gangbusters, and the other one you go, well, is it dead yet? Is it dying? Because they just don't seem to be thriving at all.
Lazy bee.
Yeah. Yeah. You have that sort of thing happen. There's
Well,
no way you can predict.
And there may be some competition factor that's going on.
Could be competition, your stronger hive could be going over and robbing the weaker. You never know exactly what's going on. You could, if you keep records and kind of track what's going on, you can take steps to maybe correct the issue and make it better. But you'll never have the 2 hives be exactly alike. It's kind of like having 2 dogs. Both dogs, they're going to have personalities. They're going to be the same. And raising bees, you're a farmer. You're going to worry about the weather. You're going to worry about the rain. You're going to worry about the heat. You're going to worry about the cold. When you start having bees, you're a farmer. You're dealing with the same type of issues that anybody that's raising crops is dealing with. And I can tell you last year was awful. I lost more hives than I have ever lost. And I've been through lots of years without losing any. But last year was just awful.
That's the rainfall, you think?
Rainfall, and then the other thing is because of COVID, all these people were staying home, and I think I'll blame it on bored men. Bored men that didn't want to be in the house went out with their mowers and they mowed down every wildflower, every blade of grass, everything. You know, they cut down trees, they eliminated shrubs, they took out everything they possibly could. I think they would have mowed the highway if they possibly could have mowed the highway. They did mow all the bar ditches. You know, you know what they couldn't mow with the lawnmower, they weed whacked down.
Hey, that's not necessarily the man's fault.
Yeah,
They ran out of the excuse, they couldn't use the excuse, I don't have time for it anymore.
Yeah, they didn't have that excuse, and their wife said, probably said, "Get the hell out of my house."
Go do something.
Go do something, that's right.
Go do something, you're driving me nuts.
That's why every weekend Home Depot Lowe's put the package where he went.
Yeah, Home Depot, Lowe's, Harbor Freight was overflowing, yeah.
So does that mean you gotta kinda keep your place kinda overgrown, you know?
Yeah, let your weeds
Let your
thrive.
weeds thrive.
Let
I
your
don't know
weeds
if I
thrive.
can do that. I'm sure
And
you
in every meeting, I'll talk about, you know, different plants that are, you know, produce nectar, and, you know, during the season of flowers, because one of the reasons is like, okay, don't go mow that down. It's producing stuff, and as a beekeeper, pretty soon you'll be going around going, hey, I see a bee on that. What is that plant? The bees like it. What is it? I need more of those. Yeah. And being a beekeeper, you start learning more about plants. You'll start noticing, you know, plants that you never noticed before.
Just because that honey locust has got a bunch of big old nasty thorns on it, don't take it out.
Right.
Don't take out the mesquite trees.
Yeah, there you
Mesquite
go.
trees make excellent honey.
Yeah.
Excellent honey. Yeah, you'll learn a different appreciation of flowers. So anyway, whoops, I need to do that. So lastly, here at the top, you'll have usually have an inner cover, and this is called the telescoping cover. Now there's other covers available out there, and I didn't bring an example of those today. Yeah, I think we do have slides for it later. The only reason you need an inner cover here is because of bees doing propolis. If you put this lid straight down on here, what will happen is the bees will propolis it, and you won't be able to get that thing off.
They glue it down.
They'll glue it down. Okay, so hive stands, keep hives off the ground. Others, you know, some people will build what they multi-hive stands. They'll build like a long thing, and you know it makes it easier to work the bees. But a lot of times you transmit vibrations and stuff, and if they're pretty close, you can put hives basically right next to each other. You know, commercial beekeepers will put 4 hives on a pallet and have them facing 4 different directions. You can do that. But what happens is when you start working one, the others will notice the vibrations and stuff, and a lot of times they're upset before you even open the box. Also, when you got them real close together, you'll have more drift from worker bees going from one hive to another. And if you have a case of where you've got a disease problem, that drift can transmit diseases. Also, varroa mites. If you have one that's you know infested really bad with varroa mites and it's failing, you'll have what's called the varroa mite bomb, and the bees that are leaving that hive, the varroas will jump on them and then be taken to another hive and can cause the same problem.
So you have cultural problems that you can avoid by having them separated.
By having them separated, you know, you can avoid some issues, but I do understand there's a lot of beekeepers that will put, you know, like 3 or 4 hives on one big long stand. And like I said, I know it is easier to work that way because you can go to this one and just take a step over and go to the next one, take a step. What I do is I have mine all separated, And then I have a wagon that I put all my equipment in. I just pull my wagon, you know. So the closest my beehives are about 10 foot apart. I have one stand that's a double stand they're about that far apart. And I have noticed, you know, some vibration problems. And when the one hive went Africanized, the bee, after I, you know, took that hive out and started to kill it, forager bees that came back went into the next hive and made it more aggressive. Eventually, those worker bees die off and they go back to, but for the time being, you know, they were a lot more aggressive because of those foragers, you know, Africanized foragers.
They needed a home too.
Yeah, they needed a home too, and they went to the next closest one. Otherwise, they probably would have scattered through all my hives. So it's just something to, you know, there's pros and there's cons to doing like multi-hive stands. Also, multi-hive stands, a lot of times you'll have more problems with robbing. You know, the strongest one on the stand is more likely to try and rob the weakest one on the stand. Stands, buying stands from, you know, this is a standard stand. It just sits really low to the ground. It's just basically to keep it from getting really wet. You don't want a lot of moisture in your hive. When I first bought my beehives, I bought them as kits, so they all came with these. But I have this sitting on top of wooden stands that I've been. The only thing on that is you want to make sure that those stands are sturdy enough to, you know, support several hundred pounds. So you can buy, I think Atwood's is actually selling these kind of things. They get kind of expensive in stands. You can buy them stands, and they have a stand that's called Ant Defiant. It has little pots on the bottom that you can put oil in to keep ants from crawling up your legs. You'll have to deal with ants probably on occasion.
Usually carpenter ants or other kind of ants that cause
I've had
trouble?
problems with both because since I've got my yard at the house has a lot of trees. I've had some problems with carpenter ants.
What about fire ants?
And I've had problems with fire ants. A lot of times if I have a lot of problems, I'll put moats around the legs. So I'll get like the plastic sandwich containers, and I'll cut a hole in the lid that's a little bit bigger than the leg, and then I put motor oil, just cheap motor oil in there, and then put the lid down. The ants will come up and they won't cross the oil. The other thing you can do is if you just got a mild problem, you can sprinkle cinnamon around. They don't like cinnamon. In my out yard, I've had some problems with them wanting to come up and get into my syrup feeders at the top because they're attracted to that sugar. And I'll sprinkle cinnamon in that top box to repel it. So there's a couple of different, you know, those are the main two ways. And then of course I'll put out ant poison around on mounds that get in the area. But you know, you can't get rid of ants. They're everywhere. They're gonna show up.
Fire ants will dominate each other and fight between different mounds, and you can go kill out a mound, and another mound is ready to go whenever you kill out that dominant mound. They say, oh, you just moved them. No, you probably killed it out, but you didn't kill them all out.
Well, there's that, and then also fire ants will have multiple mounds that are all interconnected.
Sure.
So you treat one mound, and they just shut that door and open up the other door.
Yeah. Ready to go.
Yep. They've learned. In fact, the fire ants nowadays, a lot of times, they have multiple queens.
Oh, yeah.
They've adapted to survive. So it's gotta have something to sit on. It has to have something. You can't just sit a, a box with the bottom board. You don't want to sit that directly on the ground. So at bare minimum, you either need, a little low stand or, an old pallet or something. You don't want it sitting directly on the ground. You can get the screw bottom boards, or you can go with solid bottom boards. It's kind of up to you. The bottom board is usually the first piece of the equipment. They have problems with rot. Also, your boxes, usually, if they have separation or rot problems, it's usually at the corners, because, I recommend that you paint or stain or do something with your, just to protect them, make them last a little bit longer.
What kind of stain or paint would you use that wouldn't affect the
You can use anything on the outside. You don't want to do anything on the inside.
The unfinished on the inside.
Now, the only thing that, some people will use the boiled linseed oil on the inside. I don't do that. Now, I will tell you, if you do use linseed oil on the top, be sure and take a lot of precautions with your rags because it is highly flammable. I know a person that burnt down their house because of, they were doing cabinets and stuff in the house and they left the rags around. They burnt their house down, and a new an Eagle Scout. They were building picnic tables outside for the to put at the Turkey Center at Olive Bluff, and they left the rags in their barn. They burnt their barn down. Be careful with that. The rags and the linseed oil. It's highly flammable, but it's not really necessary. Paint the outside edges on the bottom boards. You can see on this bottom board, I just painted back just, the top box right here. So I just painted this part. I think Byron paints his whole bottom board.
I paint the inside of that because it's basically water moisture that does get in there. But I don't paint the rest of the inside of the box, just a lot of time.
Yeah, so, like in the boxes,
Unfinished.
it's not painted.
So do these boxes come painted, or you just have painted?
You can buy them any way you want to spend money. You can, in our last class, we had a gentleman, he said, well, I'm not going to paint them or put them together myself. I'll hire somebody to do it. And it's cheaper for me to buy them already assembled and painted than it would be for me to pay somebody to do that for me. So, he bought everything. But then other people, you can buy these boxes, you buy just the wood pieces, and then glue and nail them together. If you're really into woodworking, you can buy your own wood. You just, there's lots of patterns and stuff. You can build your own. But really, buying the wood already dovetailed is a lot cheaper than trying to go find dimension lumber, unless you're a perfectionist and you want to make sure that your hive is built out of 100% cypress and you're going to stain it. Yeah. Take flowers on it. Yeah, I stenciled on almost all of my hives at the house. I didn't do that at the out yard, but yeah, you can stencil them. You can put names on them and say, Queen Edna lives here. You can do whatever you want. It depends on what your goals are. What are you doing? What makes you happy? What floats your boat? Okay. So, and we talked about the introducer. Mice and rats do like to look for a nice dry place that's protected to build nests. I haven't had any problems with mice getting in my hive, but I know a lot of times people do have that problem. But I have all of mine on stands, but I've never had that problem. But I do use the entrance reducer, especially on new hives that I'm establishing, and then in the winter time, I reduce them down. So it's a tool. Okay, boxes, 3 different widths. You can see here, deep, medium, and shallow. 5 frame nuke boxes. They're 9 inches wide, and you can put 5 frames in it. And a lot of times what I'll do with those is I'll stack them too. I'll put 1 box with the frames in there to start a new colony, and then I'll put the bottom first. And I'll put their lid like this. I'll cut this larger so I can put a feeder jar in here. And then, couldn't do it on this one. So one time I'll put a little box for another entrance. And then I'll put that on there. This is why the edge of the business table. Put my jar feeder on there, then stack another box on top. That way when I feed them, the feeder is inside. That kind of reduces the problem with robbing, because this is a weak hive, and the other bees will see that as an opportunity to steal their nutrients. So if I put the feeder jar inside, then that kind of reduces that problem. Now, the other box on there to protect the jar and put the lid on. So that's one way you can configure it. Other than that, you put it like this, and you put a boarding feeder on the front, which I've got one of those I can show you a little bit. And then last year, I had some nukes that were ready to go into larger boxes, and I could buy the boxes, I got the lids, and then I didn't get my bottom. And it was months before I got my bottom one. So I had nuke boxes stacked 3 high. So, with 2 of these, that was the equivalent of 1 of these. So they had 2 boxes that were a brood, and then I had my feeder on top of that. Because I didn't have a way to put them in a new box, I didn't have any bottom doors. And they took forever to get me those bottom doors. Normally, when I order from this Man Lake, when I order from them, within a few days, it's sitting on my porch. But with COVID, I was waiting, things were trickling in forever. So I had to, basically use new boxes to house my bees until I was able to put them in a regular size box. So, deep, medium, or shallow. The deep, on this they're saying about 60 pounds when filled with honey. That's usually because they don't put a lot on those outside frames. The outside frames in the hive is usually used for the foragers. When they come in at night, they got a place to hang out. So they will hang out on the sides and on empty frames on the sides. So when you go in and inspect during the day, you won't see a whole lot of bees on there. But at night, those things fill up. If there isn't enough space there, a lot of times they'll hang out on the bottoms of the frames. You can even buy what they call slatted racks, especially in the colder parts of the country. A lot of times they'll put slatted racks on the bottom, which are basically about like that, and have little slats, just for a place for the forager bees to come in and spend the night. Here in Texas, when it's hot, you'll see bees hanging out on the front of the hive in the middle of the night. They're just out there sleeping on the front porch where it's a little cooler. Okay, inner cover. That protects the bees from going down the top cover to the bottom. There's are two sides to inner covers, and that it kind of depends on the different manufacturers. You'll see a lot of variation. Most covers are like this. It has a little bit of lip on both sides, so a lot of them are like that. But this particular box was donated. This came is one that Atlas carries. I think it's a little giant. Now on it, it's got a depression here, but the other side is flat. So when you put this in, you want to put this side up so that the bees will get a little bit of ventilation, because they can vent out of here and they can also come in and out here. Because if you put this side up, they have the ventilation here and they've got more space here, but your lid's going to fit perfectly flat, and you have no airflow other than what comes in here now. Which, depending upon what you're doing, you can use this either way. But if you look at this, it says this side up, and it depends on what you're doing and what time you're in. So not all inner covers are designed the same. In the summertime, I built screen inner covers, and I put screen inner covers on a lot of my houses, just to give them more airflow because it's so hot. You can also buy screen inner covers, but they're easy to build. So what is going on with this? I don't know why I got these bundles. Okay, inner cover. Sometimes they call them crown boards, but most people call them inner covers. The oval hole in the middle is on some of them they're cut to fit what they call porter bee escapes. And the porter bee escapes, what they are is like a one-way door. When you're trying to get the bees out of your honey supers so that you can harvest, you can put bee escapes on there and then put bee repellent in there, like honey robber. There's several different ones that repels the bees and makes them go out away from the honey frames. So you can put fume boards on there to get them to leave, and they'll go out that bee escape and then they can't come back in. So this one, the way it was done, this would probably fit a porter bee escape. I've noticed that most of the man-laid covers wouldn't fit a porter bee escape unless you modify it. I talked about you can use ventilated inner covers in the hot weather to help give them more airflow. On this hive, you can see I drilled some holes here. I've got corks in there, but you can pull those corks up, and that gives it a little bit of ventilation through the hive too. The bees also like to use that in the summertime as additional entrances. In the wintertime, I put corks I bought from Hobby Lobby in the hives that have those to close it up. And sometimes it's like they're sitting there going, "Why are you closing our door?" they're looking at me going, "What's going on? Why are you doing this?" This one has a notch. Sometimes when you get them, they'll have notches. Sometimes they don't. You can always, take a little cookie claw and cut your own. If you're in some scenarios when you're like doing hive combines, you want to make sure you close that up, or you flip it the other way so that they can't use it. So there's different reasons why you want to have the notches or extra holes, and people do it differently. Okay. Top covers. These covers are both, they're called telescoping covers, and then they have what's called a migratory cover. And a migratory cover, it just has a lip at the front, it's flat on the top, and a lip at the back, and it doesn't have any sides on it. It just sits down flat. You do not use an inner cover with it. The reason they call them migratory covers is because that's what they use for the commercial beehives. This is extra shipping labor. It's extra equipment that you're sending out. So with that migratory cover, they can sit the hives right next to each other. They don't have this lip here on there. So they can butt them right up against each other and put them on a pallet and lift them up with a forklift and load them on a truck. So they use the migratory covers a lot. If you buy complete hives, like I know Coronado Bees sells complete hives, PBS sells complete hives. They cost a lot more because they already have bees in their build network. But a lot of times their equipment that they sell you has migratory covers. Most homeowner type beekeepers use the telescoping covers and inner covers. I paid a lot extra when I started my apiary at the house, and I have what's called a garden hive top, which is a peak type top with copper on it. But when I was doing my hive, I was thinking of them as being a show place. People come out and look at my apiary. So those things cost about $70 a piece. It's a big investment. You all have a couple of hives and you want it to be nice and decorative, next to your garden, go for it. But do use caulk and seal up every crack and crevice. Because last year I had problems with carpenter ants, found that there was a little crack where the two boards went together like this, and they were building nests in the top of it. And I had to take the lids off, and I was forcing cinnamon in there and motor oil in order to get them to vacate the premises. So no matter what kind of cover you use, ventilation will be required. It says may be required. In Texas, ventilation is required. There's different ways that you can do that. Some of the pretty simple ways to do it. Okay. Queen excluders. This is Kleenex. These are queen excluders. You can buy them in plastic, and these are 8 ranks, so they're really narrow. They also have metal. Their purpose is to keep the queen from going up and laying in the sewers. Now, you don't always need these. It kind of depends on the personality of your hive, what you're doing. If you're trying to put supers directly on a single beak, you will probably need a queen excluder. There's also other things that you can use them for. You can put them on the bottom of your hive to, if you introduce a brand new queen, to make sure that she doesn't leave. One of the things about the queen excluder is the worker bees can squeeze through, but they don't really like to. So if you use one, you have to wait until they get some resources up in that super to put it on, because if you just put an empty box up there, a lot of times they won't want to squeeze through this to do anything else. Another thing you can do is, like if you have a 10-frame, you can put an 8-frame one on there and give them some space on the sides for the workers to go up, because the queen usually stays in the center. On this one, what I did is I just cut the plastic out on the sides, so the workers can have easier access, but the queen who stays in the middle wouldn't go up. Sometimes you don't need it at all if you have a good honey barrier on your frame.
Yeah.
So it's an option.
We're right at halfway through the slide, which is 1 hour and 20 minutes. Want to stop and take a break?
Yeah, I guess we can.